Many of you have enjoyed my videos talking about how conservatives often miss the messages of their favourite games and movies and TV shows, and how they also try sometimes to take those films and try and paint them as pro-conservative. And I've got no problem with people enjoying some art that doesn't, really share their politics. But it's always funny the way these guys try and co-opt this stuff and present it as like a right-wing thing. So today, when we're talking about music, I do acknowledge that music as a medium can quite easily be enjoyed, even if you don't understand the lyrics. Because we like international music that doesn't share the same language as us. You can maybe not even understand the lyrics, even if it is in your language. And of course, many bands aren't political. But the ones I wanted to talk about today are the bands that are very political, with explicitly political lyrics, and conservatives saying that these are their favourite bands, and basically just missing the entire point of the band themselves. So we're going to be talking about Rage Against the Machine, we're going to be talking about CCR, The Smiths, and we're going to be talking about Radiohead. But before we get any further, a lot of my work on this channel is demonetized because when you're covering more serious, sometimes edgier topics, YouTube doesn't like this. So if you've ever enjoyed my work, please consider becoming a patron. And you don't have to pledge a crazy amount. I want to build up my Patreon based on as many people as possible pledging little amounts, like $1 or $2. So if you feel like I have ever brought anything that's worthwhile into your life and my content, please really consider becoming a patron to help me continue to do this, regardless of if YouTube monetize or not most of my videos in a given month. Also, if you want to join our communities, come check out our Discord and my subreddit. Those links in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, please check out the Kavernacle at Twitter, at Instagram, and also my personal Reddit, where you can keep up to date with all my content and what I'm doing. Thanks so much, guys, for the support lately. We're nearly going to hit 35k. I feel it's going to come in the next couple of weeks. But every 5k, we get a new chocolate orange, so I'm going to get a new one when I get 35. Also, if you want to catch my live streams, that's on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and I post them all on the Kavernacle Extra. And quick note to make about this video now is I cannot play the songs I'm going to talk about because I don't want problems with copyright strikes from people who produce this music. So please go listen to some of these songs when I'm done because they're great ones. If I'm going to talk about my own favourite political songs, I'm going to talk about one of them in the video called Harrowdown Hill by Tom York, the lead singer of Radiohead. There's also a good one called Where Is Home by Block Party. These are both from British artists, but I like these political songs a lot, so I'd highly recommend. So I'm going to talk about why I wanted to make this video and what inspired me. Now, of course, the Rage Against the Machine stuff is pretty, well known at this point. Also, I just realised I'm still wearing my headphones and listening to music. I think it's quite fitting for the video. So let's start with, what I saw months and months ago. So basically, it was people realising that Rage Against the Machine were like a highly political band. Now, if you don't know who Rage Against the Machine are, we're going to get into how political these guys are. I'd probably say it's one of the most political bands in existence. So someone tweeted, listening to Rage Against the Machine for the first time in a while, what dreadful lyrics, anti-cop, racist against whites, total rejection of civility, communist, and all around an aggressive embodiment of victimhood culture. And this wasn't the only one. So someone else tweeted, Tom Morello, who's a member of the band, I used to be a fan until your political opinions came out. Music is my sanctuary, and the last thing I want to hear is political BS when I'm listening to music. As far as I'm concerned, you and Pink are completely done. Keep running your mouth and ruining your fan base. Tom Morello replied, Scott, what music of mine were you a fan of that didn't contain political BS? I need to know so I can delete it from the catalogue. And also another event that was, completely ironic was Trump supporters dancing with a Blue Lives Matter flag to Killing in the Name of. I'm going to talk about the lyrics in a sec. So, Trumpers with Blue Lives Matter flags dancing to Killing in the Name of by Rage Against the Machine, a song written about revolution against institutional racism and police brutality. Irony at its finest. So we're going to get back to the anti-cop stuff. That is seriously funny. And one more person who apparently is a big fan of Rage Against the Machine is former Speaker of the House, former Republican candidate for Vice President, Paul Ryan. And Tom Morello actually replied to Paul Ryan saying that Rage Against the Machine was one of his favourite bands. So Morello says, Ryan claims that he likes Rage's sound, but not the lyrics. Well, I don't care for Paul Ryan's sound or his lyrics. He can like whatever bands he wants, but his guiding vision of shifting revenue more radically to the 1% is antithetical to the message of Rage. I clearly see that Ryan has a whole lot of rage in him. A rage against women, immigrants, a rage against workers, a rage against gays, a rage against the poor, a rage against the environment. Basically, the only thing he's not raging against is the privileged elite he's grovelling in front for campaign contributions. Rage's music affects people in different ways. Some tune out what the band stands for and concentrate on the moshing and throwing elbows in the pit. For others, Rage has changed their mind and their lives. Many activists around the world, including organisers of the global Occupy movement, were radicalised by Rage Against the Machine and worked tirelessly for a more humane and just planet. Perhaps Paul Ryan was moshing when he should have been listening. My hope is that maybe Paul Ryan is a mole. Maybe Rage did plant some sensible ideas in this extreme fringe right-wing nut job. Maybe if he's elected, he'll pardon Leonard Peltier. Maybe he'll throw US military support behind Zapatistas. Maybe he'll fill Gitmo with the corporate criminals that are funding his campaign. That's one possibility, but I'm not betting on it. So a pretty good takedown of Paul Ryan, and someone who is basically saying, you know, some people do like our music without listening to the message. But, you know, Paul Ryan, basically, you're what our message is all about. You're the person we're talking about in our music. Now, to circle back to the cop point and how ridiculous it is for people to complain that Rage Against the Machine are political, Killing in the Name has these lyrics. So, over and over again in the song, they say, some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. Talking about the high number of policemen who were in groups like the Klan and stuff. So I'm not going to talk about their lyrics all day because I want to talk about their activism a bit more. But they have another song called Wake Up, so here are the lyrics. Standing with the fury that they had in 66, and like E-double, I'm mad, still knee-deep in the system shit. Hoover, he was a body remover, I'll give you a dose, but it'll never come close. It goes on to say, departments of police, the judges, the feds, networks at work, keeping people calm. You know they went after King when he spoke about Vietnam. He turned the power to the have-nots, and then came the shot. So it goes on to say, you better beware of retribution with mind war, 2020 visions and murals of metaphors, networks at work keeping people calm. You know they murdered X and tried to blame it on Islam. He turned the power to the have-nots, and then came the shot. Basically talking about how the deaths of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were basically done by the government because they didn't like them speaking truth to power. So highly political lyrics there. Like, you cannot debate this band are highly anti-establishment and they're very left-wing. It's so ridiculous Paul Ryan, of all people, likes these guys, or conservatives in general, because doesn't there come a limit where you like the tune and like the way it sounds, but when it's actually criticising you really scathingly and the band say they hate you, maybe it's time to, like, you know, walk away from that, you know, passion you have for the band. They have, like, their own Wikipedia section dedicated to their activism, so here's some examples of it. On January 26, 2000, filming of the music video for Sleep Now in the Fire caused the doors of the New York Stock Exchange to be closed and the band to be escorted from the site by security. Directed by Michael Moore, the video was shot on the steps of the Federal Hall National Memorial across the New York Stock Exchange in downtown Manhattan. The band invited fans to join them in the shoot, and approximately 300 showed up. After the breakdown of the shoot, the band members, along with their many fans, stormed the doors of the stock exchange. Della Rocca was shoved away from the entrance after briefly entering through a side door. They then succeeded in forcing the stock exchange to lock its doors during the middle of the trading day. After the incident, Morello was quoted as saying, "Our protest stopped trading at the stock exchange for the last 2 hours of the day. I guess we stopped downsizing for at least a couple hours." There are so many different examples, but here's another one I like. At the Coachella 2007 performance, Della Rocca made an impassioned speech during Wake Up, which I read you some of the lyrics to, citing a statement by Noam Chomsky regarding the Nuremberg trials and subsequent actions by US presidents. And he said, "A good friend of ours once said that if the same laws were applied to US presidents, which were applied to the Germans after World War II, every single one of them, every last rich white one of them from Truman on, would have been hung. And this current administration is no exception." But after Fox News was saying they were agitating for, I guess, the assassinations of presidents and stuff, they responded and said, "What we said was that he, Bush, should be brought to trial as a war criminal. That's what we said. And we don't back away from the position because the real assassinator is Bush and Cheney and the whole administration for the lives they've destroyed here and in Iraq. They're the ones, and what they refused to air, which was far more provocative in my mind and in the minds of my bandmates, is this: but the system has become so brutal and vicious and cruel that it needs to start wars and profit from the destruction around the world in order to survive as a world power. That's what we said, and we refuse not to stand up. We refuse to back down from that position. Now, that's why it's so ironic conservatives love Rage Against the Machine, because not only are their lyrics extremely political, they will make political statements, like really, really incendiary ones, and really, really anti-establishment, left-leaning ones, in the middle of a concert. So you really, really cannot separate this band from their message like you can maybe with other singers. Now, to move on a bit more, another funny one, including like Republicans, is Trump used to play Fortunate Son by CCR at a lot of his campaign rallies and on his helicopter and stuff. And it's literally like the song was written about people like him, but with no sense of irony, he's playing that. Now, some of the articles I read, and I probably believe it's the case, Fortunate Son has become an iconic song because of its association with the Vietnam War. It's used in Vietnam War movies. It's been overused. It's in every Vietnam-themed thing, but CCR basically were making anti-war songs. So the writer of the song has talked about why Trump uses it so much. So why does Trump love playing Fortunate Son at rallies? John Fogerty has a pretty good theory. I could have written that song right now, but when Mr. Trump does this over and over, stands there and tells you bald-faced lie about what he said yesterday, he's hoping we forget its original intent. He's using what I have, my record, my song, my voice, and I don't want people to think that I endorse this awful white supremacy that's so tone-deaf to our American ideas. So in another interview with American Songwriter, it talks about him in 1993. Fogerty told Rolling Stone magazine in 1993 about the people who helped inspire the hook that ends each verse. The lyrics say, "It ain't me, I ain't no millionaire's son. It ain't me, I ain't no fortunate one." It was written, of course, during the Nixon era, says Fogerty. And well, let's say I was very non-supportive of Nixon. There just seemed to be this trickle down to the offspring of people like him. I remember you'd hear about his daughter, Tricia Nixon, and her husband, David Eisenhower. You get the impression that these people got preferential treatment, and the whole idea of being born wealthy or being born powerful seemed to be really coming to the fore in the late 60s confrontations of cultures. So not that I would expect Donald Trump to understand like anything, but it's extremely ironic he was playing this song that is essentially calling out people just like him. Now, I want to shift this conversation more to the UK. So the UK music scene, especially with bands, has traditionally been very anti-conservative, anti-Tory, and this is because of extremely polarising figures like Margaret Thatcher, and because a lot of the most famous British bands in modern times came out of the 80s and the 90s, where that legacy was still being affected by Thatcher. Their lyrics were often very political. Now, I'm talking about another conservative who loves music that is pretty much critical of his own policies, and that is David Cameron, the former Prime Minister of the UK, who of course was from the Tory party, said that the Smiths were one of his favourite bands. Now, the Smiths probably don't have a great reputation these days for like good politics because Morrissey is such a lunatic. But obviously they have other members, and their body of work before they broke up in, I think, 1987 has a lot of stuff to do with Thatcherism and Thatcher's Britain and stuff. So upon finding out that David Cameron liked the Smiths, Johnny Marr tweeted back in 2010, "David Cameron, stop saying that you like the Smiths. No, you don't. I forbid you to like it." Which David Cameron responded, telling the BBC that, "I've now got Johnny Marr and other members of the band saying that I'm not able to listen to the Smiths. When I've got the complete and full set, even then, I'm afraid I will go on and listen to the Smiths." And because we're going to talk about him a bit later, Tom York also spoke out against David Cameron, saying he would sue him if he used any of his music in his election campaign. Now, David Cameron has also said The Queen is Dead is his favourite album, which adds even more to the irony. An article by Pitchfork.com talks about the politics of the Smiths. So in 1986, Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government was in its second term, victorious after defeating a year-long strike by the National Union of Mine Workers, who protested the closure of the country's coal pits, most of which were in the north. So Morrissey was very political about this stuff. So a classic album Sunday article said, "Morrissey saw her actions, Margaret Thatcher, as a negative contribution to the country's environment, art and leading industries like manufacturing, and he was infuriated by her manipulation of the country's livelihood. The song's introduction of 'Take Me Back to Dear Old Blighty' in The Queen is Dead references the L-shaped, and states a wish to be taken back to a better Britain, not one led by Thatcher." When his voice enters the mix, Morrissey cracks jokes of Prince Charles's weakness to his mother, being a very distant descendant of a past royal, and wishes to go for a walk where it's quiet and dry and talk about his precious things with the Queen. His imaginative wit would eventually lead him to kill the Queen, but he feels alone in the celebration of it. Why doesn't anyone else see the fulfillment of his rage? So on Margaret Thatcher, he said specifically, in 1984, he said, the entire history of Thatcher is one of violence, oppression and horror. I think that we must not lie back and cry about it. She's only one person and she can be destroyed. And after an attempted assassination attempt by the IRA, Morrissey said the only sorrow is Thatcher escaped unscathed, which actually led a lot of people, including the press, to urge Home Secretary Douglas Hurd to crack down on the Smiths' rhetoric. So like many British bands in the 1980s, absolutely hated Thatcher, and this translated into their music. And Morrissey and the Smiths were extremely outspoken about how much they hated Margaret Thatcher, conservatism, austerity, all these awful things Thatcher did. So then for David Cameron, the head of the Conservative Party, people who absolutely worship Margaret Thatcher even to this day, to turn around and say, this song and this album is my favourite, like one of my favourites of all time, is so insane to me. And it's pretty funny because basically these guys also hate David Cameron as well. So Tom York popped up in what I was saying a minute ago. So I want to get onto Radiohead as well. So Tim Pool tweeted, who is the greatest band of all time and why is it Radiohead? And Paul Joseph Watson has also said this stuff before, but I think he's deleted it because I tried to find him saying, you know, how much he loved them. But someone else has tweeted, don't you literally listen to Nirvana and Radiohead, when he was complaining about the pressing music by, you know, different musicians, because he has tweeted that he likes Radiohead, although he has said he doesn't like Tom York personally. Now here's another one where a lot of like edgelords like Radiohead, and just like the Smiths, even though Radiohead and, you know, the members are a bit younger, they were kind of moulded in this 1980s anti-Thatcher period, and a lot of artists were. But Tom York is the most outspoken of all these people. But in comparison with the other bands I've mentioned, it is ridiculous David Cameron likes the Smiths. It's ridiculous Trump likes the song Fortunate Son. It's ridiculous Paul Ryan likes Rage Against the Machine. These bands are like very political with their lyrics. Radiohead I can actually understand a bit more with conservative people liking them despite the band's politics being very anti-conservative, mainly because these guys keep it a bit more vague. You can find very political undercurrents in OK Computer, the album, or, you know, more contemporary songs like Burn the Witch, which is kind of like about Brexit and xenophobia and stuff like that. But fair enough, you can maybe like this band and not share their politics, but I still thought it was interesting to talk about how politically active some of the members are. And I think it is actually very hard to like Tom York as an individual artist, because he has a solo career as well, and say you're right wing. I'm going to get into, you know, one of the songs I mentioned at the start. I'm actually listening to it right now on repeat, Harrow Hill by Tom York. But let's get into what his politics are. Now, he has been constantly, you know, anti-Brexit, anti-Tory, anti-conservative government in general, anti lots of things, right? And he has some controversy because of the Israel stuff, of course, on the left, because they don't like him for what he commented on that stuff. But he wrote an article in 2003 about the West and like Western supremacy, Western chauvinism. And it's a pretty good article. I'm going to read some of it now, just to show you how left-wing this guy is in certain respects. So September 8th, 2003, the West is creating an extremely dangerous economic, environmental and humanitarian time bomb. We are living beyond our means. The poorest countries need to trade on fair terms with us if they're ever going to get off their knees. When the World Trade Organization started out, poor countries were spun the line that they could get access to Western markets if they signed up to a pro-business agenda, even though that agenda was potentially at the cost of their already suffering populations. The West has not fulfilled its part of those agreements. It has reneged on its agreement to cut subsidies to its own farmers, and rules on IP rights even mean drugs are too expensive and 30,000 people die a day as a direct consequence. When developing countries export to the West, they have to pay tariffs 4 times that between Western countries themselves, costing £63 billion a year. Why? Western governments are increasingly losing their grip on the reality of the situation. See the key to fixing this problem to be more liberalisation. This, to me, feels like a bus full of religious lunatics rolling into town, singing free trade songs and banging tambourines as war and famine break out all around them. It's nonsense. Why should the most desperate continue to cooperate with such fools when they've increasingly have nothing left to lose? They are not seeing the so-called benefits, but they are seeing too much of the cost. This sort of free trade capitalism is a faith against all the odds. Nowadays, it seems to have taken the authority of the word of God, as it has always been thus. but all of it is really a set of trade rules that should and could benefit all and could be changed. Why should it be such a corrupt protection racket? Increasingly, the effects of such globalisation make it clear the only ones benefiting are the corporations who have the ear of our governments and having their free trade cake and eating it. They make sure any rules affecting their freedoms are first on the agenda at the World Trade Organization. And I got involved in Jubilee 2000 and tried to persuade governments, the IMF and the World Bank to cancel the unpayable debts. It seemed like a reasonable, fair thing to ask. The situation was so utterly ridiculous, I didn't believe they would deny us, but they did. They found every excuse they could, but the only reason that I could find was that the West cannot shake its need to control the rest of the planet in any way it can. They cannot shake off its colonial attitude. In order to keep order, they have to have their fingers permanently wrapped around throats. That article is kind of prophetic because what the World Bank, IMF and the WTO actually created in many countries were these entrenched oligarchies that privatized their economies, which really destroyed any economic hopes for its population. And Obama and others like to paint the Arab Spring as a movement against authoritarianism, which is hilarious since nearly all these governments were backed by the US. But it was actually a movement against the IMF, World Bank, and their capitalist economic policies. And Tom York is extremely right here in mentioning this stuff. And this is what created the Arab Spring. People were sick of this stuff. Young people had no hopes in these countries and, pretty much still don't today. And it was an anti-capitalist revolution. That's what the Arab Spring was. Don't let anyone tell you different. Now, also, he has some wisdom that a lot of Western leftists could learn. We always talk about capitalism like it's a microcosm of a country. It's in the US, it's in Britain. But there's also the problem of global capitalism, which is built on colonialism, where we have these more developed societies because we extract the wealth from poorer countries that we've always extracted the wealth from. And to be a true anti-capitalist, you have to be against this system as well. Global capitalism, where the lives we enjoy in the West, they're not made because we're better than other people. It's made because we exploit countries that are poorer, that we've purposely made poorer to keep extracting the wealth from. And that's what Tom York gets at. Now, that's not always present in his music, I get, but this is the lead singer of Radiohead. Now, to get into his very explicit lyrics, so Harrow Downhill, which I said I'm listening to right now on repeat, is a really good song. I really like it. I wish I could play it for you right now, but go listen to it after this video. But basically, there was a guy called Dr. David Kelly, who was a British weapons expert who was found dead in a park in Harrow Downhill in 2003. He told a reporter just before this that the government, the British government, had falsely identified WMDs in Iraq, leading to a lot of speculation that he was actually killed by the government. Now, it's a big rabbit hole to go down, but there's a lot of good evidence that he didn't take his own life, which was the initial conclusion. So look into this, and York didn't believe this either. Many people don't, MPs from both parties, both don't believe this stuff today. There's still a campaign to find out what really happened. Now, York said he was uncomfortable about the subject matter and was conscious of the family's grieving, but not to write it would have been worse. And he said it's the most angry song he's ever written, going on to say the government and the Ministry of Defence were implicated in his death. They were directly responsible for outing him, and that put him in a position of unbearable pressure he couldn't deal with. They knew what they were doing and what it would do to him. But this is also about the Iraq War in general. So Harrow Downhill by Tom York. Don't walk the plank like I did. You will be dispensed with when you've become inconvenient, talking about David Kelly. Up on Harrow Downhill, where you used to go to school, that's where I am, that's where I'm lying down. Did I fall or was I pushed? Again, referencing what happened to him. But it also goes on to say, we think the same things at the same time, we just can't do anything about it. And that's a little thing that plays throughout the song. And it also says, they just want me gone, they want me gone. And Tom York has numerous political individual songs. So I will grant with Radiohead and Tom York, they make very good songs with very weird lyrics at times. It's a lot easier to miss their political leanings than the other bands. I thought it was just an interesting one to highlight as well. Maybe that a lot of these bands people wouldn't like them in real life. Tom York would absolutely hate Tim Pool. Tom York would hate Paul Joseph Watson. Tom York would hate most conservatives because he does. But that gets to the overall point about conservatives and art. This one is more funny because it's literally conservatives liking extremely political bands, basically saying that they hate them. And then being like, oh, that's my favourite band. That's my favourite song, the one specifically that says it hates me. Now, the only good thing I can see of these bands is at least with conservatives in this instance, they're not really trying to appropriate the music and paint it as something else, right? So Donald Trump plays Fortunate Son because he doesn't understand it. Paul Ryan likes Rage Against the Machine because maybe he doesn't think it's really talking about him. David Cameron likes the Smiths because he probably grew up on that music. But the band are saying they hate people like him. But in the case of other things like films or video games, a lot of the times what conservatives like to do is say that they actually are conservative. So I've made the videos about Abby Shapiro and her husband where they say Red Dead 2 is a conservative game. BioShock is a pro-conservative game. And they also talk about films where they say they love Blade Runner and they love Blade Runner 2049 and completely ignore like the subtext of, the anti-capitalism or talk about the environment and stuff like that. So I think with many conservatives, there's also the problem of they take so many things at face value, right? So Blade Runner is not really a story about anti-capitalism and climate change, for example. To them, it's just the narrative. The narrative is all that matters. And if you take the narrative at face value, it's easy to miss this stuff. The same with the music here, right? Just listen to the tune and if you like the tune or not, and then you can say you like this music. And music is a different one, I'll grant people. You can like loads of music with lyrics that you don't understand. I'm thinking about many songs I like. Do I really think, oh, this song is telling me this story? You don't really sometimes. Even if you can sing the lyrics, you don't really think about what the song's about. It's only when you read them sometimes you really realise these songs are political. So I'm not as harsh with my judgment on this, but I still think it's hilarious, like the Rage Against the Machine one in particular, but also some of the other stuff as well. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Are there any other real big examples of this? I'd love to know some bands with these crazy conservative audiences. If you want to follow me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram, come join our communities on Discord and my subreddit, that is in the description. Please also consider becoming a patron, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.